Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Some Afterthoughts, and today we're going to be talking about a new TV show that I recently watched called Normal People. So just a quick synopsis, it follows the lives of two people, Connell and Marianne, through different stages of their lives and how they weave in and out of each other's lives. I know a lot of online summaries and blogs and stuff, they use the word weaving, and I think that's the best word to describe how their relationship is, because it is constantly them coming in and out of each other's lives. So we first meet Marianne and Connell in high school, where they're in the same class, and we follow their journey throughout the years when they go off to Trinity College in Dublin, and it really explores their on and again, off again relationship during this time as well. So just right off the bat, this is a very beautiful show. The cinematography is amazing, the scenery is very beautiful, it's really well shot, the plot is great. It's a limited series, so there's only 12 episodes. The episodes are quite short. Initially I was like, not sure how I feel about the short episodes, but I felt after I watched it, it was really appropriate for the storytelling. There was one episode where they went to the Italian countryside, and it was so beautiful, and it really gave me Call Me By Your Name vibes, with the scenery, with them eating ice cream. So just how beautiful the scenery and how it was shot is enough for me to recommend this show. But there are some stuff that I want to talk about. As much as I loved it, there were a lot of things that made me question things and think more profoundly, which is a good thing, I think. So the first thing I want to talk about is how I would have loved the show to have a longer beginning, just to flesh out the relationship between Connell and Marianne and how their feelings develop and how it becomes so strong over time. So from the very beginning, we know that Connell's mum works for Marianne's family as the house cleaner, and we know that Marianne and Connell are in the same class. Marianne's mother is, I'm pretty sure she's a lawyer. She's very well off, and their house is very big compared to Connell and his family. So in the first episode, we already have Marianne confessing her feelings for Connell, saying that she likes him and stuff, but just watching it, it made me question, how did we get here? Was it from all the glances that they had in class together, or was it Connell coming to pick his mum up after she's finished working at Marianne's house? And the reason why I wish it was fleshed out a bit more was because in the third episode already, it basically ended with Connell leaving a message to Marianne, crying, saying that he loves her.
I don't really know what to say other than the fact that I missed you, and I really love you, Marianne, and yeah, I'm sorry.
And it just made me wish that we had more insight into how their relationship blossomed, because it kind of went from them having these kind of secret hangouts and stuff to him not inviting her to the debs, and then her cutting him off, and then a bit down the line he forced her to confess that he misses her and he loves her. Yeah, I just wish that there was a bit more, and instead of being 3 episodes long in that first part of their life, it was fleshed out to maybe 4 or 5 episodes. So the next thing I want to talk about is Marianne as a character. I found her to be a very interesting character, and between Connell and Marianne, I actually found Marianne to be the more complex character. She's very in tune with her emotions, and I love how she's able to talk so candidly about her emotions, and we see that in the very first episode when she's confessing that she likes Connell. But I find her to be a very insecure character, and we see this throughout the show in a lot of the things that she says. So I think in one episode they went to the back of the school and Connell showed her this couch, and she asked him if he knew that if she lay down on that couch she would let him do anything to her.
I would lie down here and you could do anything you wanted to me.
And there was another one in that scene with Peggy, after Peggy leaves because she was being weird and talked about having a threesome with them. And then it was just Marianne and Connell, and Marianne said that she would do anything for Connell. And I think that made Connell feel very funny and gave him an anxiety attack.
Couldn't have sex with you in front of her.
I'd have done it if you wanted to.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
It's just very interesting because she almost puts herself into this subservient role, or trying to be submissive to please other people, especially Connell. And I don't know, I just feel like a lot of the things she says hints at her being very insecure, despite the cold exterior that she puts on.
Do you like her better than me? Is she better in bed than I am?
However, it's also very interesting because despite being insecure, she's the one who is breaking up with all her boyfriends throughout the course of the TV show, and it's actually Connell who's the one who's being broken up with. So I think there's that reversal, her being submissive and subservient, but then being the ones who's taking control and breaking up with the people that she's in relationships with.
I don't think this is working. It's not what I want anymore.
And I don't want to psychoanalyze Marianne because I feel like I don't know enough, but I strongly feel that her family upbringing really affected how she developed as a person. So for Marianne's family, her father isn't in the picture. I think it was mentioned that he was abusive, but he also passed away, and she has a very abusive relationship with her brother. And I feel like when you combine those two, her lack of a father figure in conjunction with her fraught relationship with her brother, I think it makes her seek out toxic romantic relationships with men in her life. And it's interesting because Connell, on the other hand, is able to have healthy relationships. So he has that really healthy relationship with Helen, even though I wasn't really a fan of it. But all the relationships that Marianne had, there was something wrong with it in terms of how the men treated her. So Marianne seems to seek validation from men who don't have her best interests at heart, and the only man in her life who does have her best interest is Connell. And that's why there's that scene where she asks, when they were having sex, to hit her, and he says he can't do it. And I think that she's been so used to these toxic, abusive relationships that when she has a healthy relationship with Connell, she feels like there's something missing, and it's almost something that she's become so accustomed to that she almost needs it. I don't know. So there was one relationship in particular that was so abusive, and it just made me really sad to watch, and it was the one with Lucas when she was on exchange in Sweden. So I have nothing against BDSM or dominant submissive relationships, but I also know that they operate with consent from both parties, and that relationship with Lucas that Marianne had was just so abusive because I feel like Lucas takes that dominant submissive relationship too far, to the point where he doesn't even acknowledge her non-consent a lot of the times as well. And I remember that scene where she's tied up and he's taking photos of her, and she says she doesn't want to do it anymore, and he says that they'll finish when he... And it just made me so sad watching that scene, because to see such an intelligent, beautiful woman be degraded like that, almost to the point where she was worthless to him. And I'm pretty sure he said something along those lines as well. But yeah, it just made me very uncomfortable watching that, and just feel so sorry for her, and just want her to have a healthy relationship with someone, even if it wasn't Connell. Alright, so that leads me to question a lot about Marianne's family and how the dynamic came to be, because in a lot of the scenes where the three are together, so Marianne, her mother, and her brother are in the same scene together, there is a lot of tension, and you can feel there's something very complicated going on underneath. That's where I wish the show went into a bit more depth, just to give us more insight into Marianne's childhood, and also explain how the family dynamic is the way it is. Because I remember in that first scene where Marianne was telling her mother about how well she did at school, and then her brother stormed out, I didn't know if he was jealous or if there was something else going on, and that just made me question why her brother hated her so much. Was it because he felt inferior to her because Marianne was so successful academically and she was beautiful and all that stuff, or if there was something deeper going on? So I would have loved a deeper character dive into Alan, the brother, but also the mother, because there are a lot of instances where the mother witnesses Alan abusing Marianne, but she stays silent, and I don't know why. I think I would have just liked more insight into the mother's thought process and the mind of that character. So I remember that dishwashing scene where Alan just pours dishwashing water onto Marianne, and the mother sees it, but she doesn't say anything, she just walks off. And then also when Marianne gets a busted nose because Alan slammed a door into her face, and Connell comes over and stuff like that, and the mother is just sitting in the living room watching TV and doesn't say anything despite hearing the conflict in the very next room. And so it just makes me wonder why she is the way she is, and if it's because she was previously a victim of abuse who was silenced with her husband and stuff like that, or if there was something else going on. And I think that's the perfect segue for me to talk about how I felt that secondary characters in the show should have been developed more to be just more well-rounded. Because yes, they are secondary characters, so they aren't as important, but I feel like it's important to develop them because they have direct impact on the lives of Marianne and Connell. One would definitely be Alan, the brother, because if we were given more insight into him and why he's the way he is, we would understand why he treats Marianne the way he does. But there are also other characters that weren't really developed, and it just made me question their actions. So the first one would be, I can't remember her name, but the ginger hair girl. She was part of the popular group, but then there was some scenes where she was really close with Marianne and they were like dancing together and all that stuff. So it just made me question, like, how did she go from being part of the popular group that hated on Marianne and made fun of her, to her dancing with Marianne and supporting her after she was touched very inappropriately at a school party. Another secondary character that I wish we knew more about, just so we could understand her behavior, was Peggy. So Peggy was Marianne's best friend in college. I don't know, I just felt that dynamic, the friendship that they had was very weird, because there was one scene where Peggy asked Connor and Marianne if they would be interested in a threesome with her. And I just feel like as a best friend, that's something very strange and very inappropriate to ask, which makes me question, were they even best friends? But also in the episode when they were all in Italy, they just seemed to end their friendship completely after the Italy debacle. So it seemed that Peggy sided with Jamie and left Marianne even though they were best friends. So that just made me question a lot of different things about their friendship with Peggy. So the next thing I want to talk about is the symbolism of doorways in the show. Throughout the show, there were heaps and heaps of doorways shown in very key moments in characters' lives. It's almost as if doorways are used as a symbol for portals or openings which let characters in and out of each other's lives. Some of the very first examples would be Marianne opening her door for Connell when he comes to pick his mum up. And then we also have the example of Connell walking through the doorway of a college party when Gareth is introducing Connell to all his friends, and that's where Marianne and Connell meet again for the first time since high school.
Marianne, there's someone I want you to meet. This is Connell.
Connell Waldron. From beyond the grave.
And then we also have the example of Connell standing in the doorway in the Italy episode where he's talking to Marianne, but Jamie's there, and we can just feel the tension between all three of them. And then we have the example of Connell talking to his English teacher outside the doorway, and that makes Marianne jealous because she asked him what they were talking about later on. And then there are also heaps and heaps of instances where Marianne or Connell are opening doors for each other, like to let them into the house, and that's very symbolic of them in a way opening the door for each other to enter into each other's lives again. And in some cases it's almost like this transgression, like this stepping into each other's worlds, sometimes for good, but then sometimes when it's unwelcomed, like for example when Connell is drunk and he has a bloody nose or whatever and he comes to Marianne's house. I don't know if that's the correct word, transgressing, but it's more like they're intruding or stepping into each other's lives. And then doorways are very important even with secondary characters. So there are a lot of scenes where secondary characters like Jamie and Gareth had to leave out of doorways before Marianne and Connell could be in private and alone and talk to each other. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is just little things that I loved about the show. The first thing I loved is just the communication style between Connell and Marianne and how witty and intelligent it was. And it's not even about what they're actually saying, but it's more how they're saying it. And it's just this constant back and forth banter that's playful but at the same time very witty and intelligent. And one thing I love is how they reuse each other's lines when they're having conversations with each other, and I love doing that myself in my own life, and I think that's why I picked up on it when they did it to each other. So one example would be Marianne saying that she doesn't like Connell's friends, and Connell saying to her that at the end of the day they're my friends, it's different for you. And then Marianne reuses that same line later on when she's in college, and it's kind of reversed where Connell's the one who's unpopular and feels lonely and Marianne's the popular one. And so Marianne says the same thing back to him, saying that at the end of the day they're my friends, it's different for you. And I just found that very interesting, one, to show how the tables have turned, but also that subverted power play, I guess. And then another example of them reusing the same lines on each other was when they reused the line, "We weren't a good fit, I could have told you that myself." So I think Marianne says that to Connell first about Connell's relationship with Rachel and how it fizzled out after high school, but then Connell says it back to Marianne later on when she tells him that she broke up with Gareth. And I just thought that was very witty and playful, but also at the same time it shows that how much they pay attention to each other and what each other say. So now I want to talk about the overall relationship between Connell and Marianne. I thought it was very real, and just the way it was depicted was so normal with the conversations, but just how they interacted with each other as well. So there's a lot of sex in the TV show. The sex that Marianne has with Connell is very sensual and very emotional, and it starkly contrasts the sex that she has with other men in her life, such as Lucas, Gareth and Jamie. Those sex scenes were depicted in a very aggressive way, or they were just very short lasting compared to those scenes with Connell. And I don't know if that's to show that those men were toxic in her life and that Connell was someone who was healthier for her, because when I watched the show it did make me question whether or not the relationship between Marianne and Connell was toxic, because their communication in a lot of parts was very poor, to the point where a lot of the problems they had could have been solved if they just communicated better with each other. So we have that scene where Connell loses his job and he's no longer able to pay rent, and Marianne has her family flat that she stays in, and instead of asking Marianne to let him stay with her for a short while whilst he gets another job or whatever, he just says something like, "I guess that means we'll see other people," and that was what ended their relationship that time. And it was such a frustrating scene, because as a viewer you know that it could have all been solved if they just expressed themselves clearer and if they just communicated better. But at the same time, I know that that scene was to show that he was ashamed of the difference in class between himself and Marianne. But I feel like if the show wanted to show that theme specifically, they should have done that a lot more throughout the show to make it more apparent, because I think there was only one particular scene where Connell's in the car with his mates and one of his friends asks about the stuff, and you could really feel he was really uncomfortable discussing how rich Marianne was and how his mother works for Marianne's family. So that scene showed the stark contrast in social class between the two. I just feel like it needed more to show that even further, and I don't know if it was done better in the novel, but in the TV show I felt like it wasn't done enough for us to really see how it affected him so much to the point where he wasn't able to ask Marianne to stay at her place and instead just ended up breaking up. So extending on from the relationship between Marianne and Connell, I want to talk about the idea of soulmates, because I feel like the TV show really questions the idea of soulmates and whether or not Connell and Marianne are soulmates for each other. I think that's a hard question to answer because they hurt each other a lot throughout the course of their lives, and they click very well on a very emotional level, but then they also lack the basic communication that is expected of any normal couple. So it just makes me question, I don't know if they are soulmates or they're just very compatible for each other and they just have problems with communication. As a hopeless romantic, I want to say that I believe in the idea of soulmates, but if I'm being realistic, I don't know if there are soulmates for us, but I think in life we just have people who are more compatible with us than others, and so we tend to want those people to stick around longer and we become attached to them because of how well we connect to them on an emotional level. I think the other thing about the idea of soulmates that this show questions is that if they are soulmates, does that mean they'll always find their way back to each other in the end? Because we see it throughout the show and how they weave in and out of each other's lives. Like, it makes me question, why do they stick around for each other so long? Because like any other relationship, if it didn't work out the first 1 or 2 times, I feel like a lot of people would just have given up by now and just like moved on because they were seeing it was toxic for them or it was never going to work out. But they just keep trying and weaving in and out of each other's lives. And so it makes me question that maybe the right people in our lives will always find a way back into our lives, no matter the circumstances. It just might take them a while, but eventually they'll find a way back into your lives. And that leads me to the last thing I want to talk about, which is the very confusing ending, because it was purposely left ambiguous about whether or not they would be together once Connell moves to New York to take up a writing course and Marianne stays back in her hometown. And I think for some people they interpreted that as them breaking up, but I think for me personally it wasn't a breakup, but more so Marianne wanted Connell to follow his dreams, and if it works out then great, if it doesn't then they'll accept it. So that was a confusing aspect as well. So it was left very ambiguous and open-ended about whether or not they were breaking up, so it wasn't concrete. But the other thing was, I just don't understand why they didn't decide to do a long distance relationship, especially because the writing course was only for 1 year and they could have easily done that, because I think they've been apart for longer than that as well. They seem to be in a very healthy space, so I don't know why they just didn't agree to do a long distance relationship. I don't know if that was another lack of communication or if that was Sally Rooney's commentary on soulmates about how even the people who we think are very right for us don't always end up with us. We might love someone so much and feel like they're the perfect person for us, but then in the end we still don't end up with them. So yeah, it just makes me question a lot of different things. Anyway, so that concludes all my thoughts on Normal People. I love this show. I haven't actually read the novel, so I'm gonna read that and see if a lot of the questions I have in this video are answered by reading the text. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comment section, and I'll see you in my next video very soon. Alright, bye guys.